Hey everyone, and welcome to Backseat Sports. I'm Josh, and that is Caleb, and today we're talking the Big Ten West. And it's going to be interesting this year. It's going to be a bloodbath between all the teams here in the West with some wild games. We're going to be talking about some of the most decisive games for each team, breaking it down, and where these teams are going to finish in the Big Ten West. We have a lot to talk about. Caleb, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. We have a ton of information to cover in this video. Yeah. It's very exciting. It's a great video every single year. Excited to see some other fan bases besides Nebraska. You know, it's great to see you all.
We love you. We love you.
We love you. Thank you for the clicks. We love your poverty franchises.
Oh, no. Starting off with the heat, but obviously we do appreciate everybody for watching. And it's always a blast seeing the kind comments, but and of course the not kind comments. Always fun time down there.
Even better.
Obviously, I think today we're gonna have some kind words for a lot of your fan bases. That's good news. So let's start here. Unfortunately, though, at the bottom, at dead last in the Big Ten West, and go from there. So we're gonna go team by team. Obviously, we're not gonna have each of us aren't gonna have the same order of our predictions. So we'll kind of go from there and talk about it a little bit. But Caleb, who do you have at the bottom of the Big Ten West?
It's very similar to last year. No, we're not talking about Nebraska, SU, but no, Northwestern.
Yeah,
at 1-8 last year. Their best win was Rutgers. Their only Big Ten conference win, 21-7. It was a very exciting game. Yeah, Vegas has them with about 4 wins this season. They're projected 4.5 wins by PFF and a solid 0.5 chance to win the Big Ten. They averaged a abysmal 16.6 points per game last year, and they gave up 213 rushing yards per game, 50 worse than in the next worst in the Big Ten. They got ran over by everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Obviously, like, it's just the upside. I'm just not sure where it is with this team. I mean, obviously, like, more than likely, Ryan Helinski will still start at quarterback. It just seems like there's just not much to get excited about outside of their offensive tackles, which everyone's been hyping up as potential NFL draft guys or draft picks are going to be up there in the draft. The rest of the talent on this team, the passing game is going to probably be a struggle. It is unlike Pat Fitzgerald to have 2 really poor seasons in a row. And so that could be the counter argument just with the belief of Pat Fitzgerald. But when you look at this team objectively, it's hard to see where that talent and that productivity is going to lie on the offensive side of the ball, or really defensively as well. The improvement they need to have to become a competent Big Ten team again. I actually have them in a tiebreaker for last place at 1-8 in the Big Ten, but they end up having 3 wins on the season as well. I'm definitely just not very high on Northwestern, and I do think Nebraska is going to beat them. Spoiler alert, we'll have a video about that here very soon. I have Northwestern beating Illinois in the final game of the season, actually. It could be very, very close. And I know, Caleb, you're higher on Illinois than I am. Yeah. And a lot of that centers around their running game.
Yeah, I mean, last year they were ranked 6th in run block in the Power Fives. Just super solid. It was just their pass game that held them back. Chase Brown returns, and again, super solid third team, all Big Ten. And I think there's room for him to grow. And now they have a new quarterback too from Syracuse transfer quarterback Tommy DeVito, and he's likely to start. And you look at Isaiah Williams too, their quarterback, who's a great wide receiver now. I think that there's just a lot of room for this team to grow. They're going to be solid defensively. I don't think they're going to score a lot of points, but I think that they're just going to play really solid Big Ten football. Not a lot of turnovers. They're going to burn clock, choke you out slowly. Yeah. And I think they'll be a solid Big Ten team.
Your best argument, obviously, is that they went 5-7 last year and 4-5 in the Big Ten with a win against Penn State, obviously in the insane 9 overtime game. And that was in Bielema's first season. So you can argue like they didn't lose Chase Brown. He returns, and the offense should still be decent. And if Tommy DeVito is even at all decent, this offense should be better than last year. And then suddenly you could be in that 6-win range. So I can see the argument. I think for me, it's more that I think the rest of the Big Ten is going to improve and their schedule gets a lot more difficult this year. I think their wins there against Wyoming or Indiana and Virginia and Chattanooga are there. Then the question is, can they beat Northwestern? If they beat Northwestern, then they're at 5 wins. And then all they got to do is upset one team, which I think is very possible. And you did pick that which is why you have them at 6 wins and making a bowl game.
I just think they're a team that you just can't sleep on this year with just being such a solid Big Ten team.
They beat Nebraska last year and they beat Penn State. So obviously I'm with you. Like you can't underestimate them. Like, so I have them at 1-8 in the Big Ten where those games just don't go their way. But I do think that they'll probably upset one of those teams, like, you know, whether it's an Iowa or a Purdue or something like that. They'll upset one of those teams and probably end up at maybe 2-8. But it's really hard to predict on paper which team that's going to be, which is why I didn't actually predict it. Up next, a really, really fascinating team. And this team is a controversial team in the Big Ten West, maybe one of the most controversial. It's Purdue coming in here as our next team up. What are your thoughts on Purdue?
Yeah, obviously they had a very good season last year. Vegas has them at 7.5 wins as the line. The Pro Football Focus is very high on them, and Aiden O'Connell too this year. Ranking them 35th in the country. For me, I just think there was too much loss. I will say Aiden O'Connell looked good outside of David Bell, but David Bell was the game breaker for them in combination with Aiden O'Connell. And I just think that losing that target is just going to be a little too much for Purdue. And again, also Karlaftis, their best defensive player. I'm not sure Purdue isn't another, a higher tier of a Big Ten team that can just replace that talent. I think Aiden O'Connell will have a good season and will definitely get some wins this year. I have him at 3-6, which is definitely underwhelming for what a lot of people see. Again, that's a 1.5 under Vegas, but they also have a difficult schedule too. They're at Maryland, at Minnesota, at Wisconsin. And then I also have them getting upset by Illinois. I think Illinois is going to do it to somebody, so I chose Purdue.
Purdue plays in Illinois, so that'd be the argument there.
And then their home games, they have Penn State and Iowa. And I think it's just a kind of a tough draw for them. Aiden O'Connell's great, but what else is there?
On my perspective with them, though, is that like Penn State and Iowa for Purdue are very winnable games, and you match up well against Iowa. So for me, like I have them beating Iowa in that game. With Iowa, all you got to do is just get a few touchdowns in, and Iowa's not going to be able to catch up. That offense should be pretty terrible this year. So I agree with you that like the upside probably is capped this year with like, again, we haven't seen Aiden O'Connell without like Rondale Moore and David Bell. And not to mention like they had like Milton Wright last year as well. So they had a lot of talent, and Payne Durham, who's going to be back this year, like at tight ends. Like they were really stacked the past few years. So I guess you could see an argument that Aiden O'Connell might be maybe slightly overhyped, but I do think he is very talented.
A great comparison too is in the Big Ten is with Tanner Morgan, with Rashad Bateman and then post Rashad Bateman. Looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. Had one of the highest completion percentages. You take him away, and even still with, Ottman Bell, and just 9-day difference.
Right. And your other argument is like, their rushing efficiency was so bad last year offensively. Like, there's not much argument that they're going to be significantly better this year. Maybe slightly better, but not like enough to move the needle.
Yeah, their yards per carry was so bad last year.
But I mean, like, even then, though, last year they had, elite wins, and like, I just think that it's possible that they're going to still be a very respectable team in the Big Ten. And so that's why I have them at 8 wins and 5-4 with losses to Penn State, at Minnesota, to Nebraska, and to Wisconsin.
One game to watch out for is Purdue versus Maryland.
That is interesting.
2 of them more high-flying offensive games. I actually have them
in
losing
Maryland,
to Maryland. Too. I have them losing that game, but I think that's just going to be one of the more fun Big Ten games to watch this year. More of the pass-heavy offenses in the Big Ten. It could kind of be a barn burner, and I'm excited to watch that one this season.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, like, Maryland is really dangerous. I mean, like, especially if Talia, we saw him look at times like an incredibly good quarterback last year. He was inconsistent and he was turnover prone. When he was on his game, he was insane. I do like the idea that what if Maryland takes that step forward and they are an elite team, then suddenly that, those losses start to pile up. So interesting team up here next. It's old Nebraska, baby. Obviously, if you haven't already watched our predictions video for Nebraska season, I highly recommend checking that out. It has an in-depth breakdown of all of our games this season and where we stand. Obviously, I have us at 7-5. Caleb has us at 5-7. So a little bit of a difference. I was going 5-4 in the Big Ten with a tiebreaker over Purdue. And I actually, because I'm a little bit lower on Iowa, I have us actually finishing 3rd in the Big Ten West. We'll talk about that in a second. Caleb, though, on the other hand, has a little bit less optimistic view at 3-6 in the Big Ten. So I don't know if we need to talk too much about Nebraska here because you can get to go check out our full-blown video on it. Again, there is upside for Nebraska to potentially have a better season than we might assume. And we talked about that in our last video, some of our upside for why Nebraska could win the Big Ten this year. So check out that video as well. So up next, let's talk about the Hawkeyes. Iowa.
Vegas has them at 7.5. Their power ranking is 22nd on PFF, which I was kind of surprised by. Obviously, they've had a great defense, and that was the reason they won so many games as they did last year. Created lots of turnovers. Spencer Petras and their offense just is not that exciting. They kind of split on Petras or Padilla last year. Both did not look good. The old adage, you have two quarterbacks, you have none, is definitely seems to be the case for Iowa. And, they also, the one bright spot is Sam Laporta, the tight end, super talented, and he's going to be a problem. But besides that, is there that much else on the offense for them?
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly was how bad their offensive line was last year. I mean, talk about un-Iowa of them. Even super with one of the best centers in all of college football, their offensive line was actually really inefficient last year. So now you remove one of the best centers in all of college football, and you're like, uh-oh, how bad could this be? So they need massive improvement from all those guys up front. And they need their guys to really hit this year if they want to, be at all in even a glimpse of an efficient offense. I mean, the offense isn't what you got to talk about with Iowa, though. It's obviously the defense. I mean, that's where the talent is. That's where the NFL all-pro type talent could be with Jack Campbell and Riley Moss.
To highlight, though, Jack Campbell is going to be ridiculous. Top 15 graders in the Power 5, from week 3. He took 972 snaps. He's just going to be a problem for him. And again, that's how Iowa won their games. Created tons of turnovers. Again, as a Nebraska fan, last year we think too, again, they take advantage of their defense, and they have, with a great punting core and a great special teams, they win the field position battle. They get the short field. And while their offense might not be amazing, they're going to set themselves up for great opportunities. And I think it's going to be more of the same. I mean, I have them at 6 wins, which is less, but 4-5 in the Big Ten. Again, they have some tough games. They have OSU on the schedule this year. Also, they play Michigan.
They're basically going to be almost the same team as last year. They were 7-2 who made it to the Big Ten championship last year. And Iowa fans' argument is like, what's the difference? We have a quarterback who's going to have another year under his belt. We're going to have probably about a similar offensive line and a defense that lost maybe a few pieces, but should be about just as good as last year, returning our best player. So from Iowa's perspective, they're like, what's changed? Why couldn't we go 7-2 again? I think the best argument would then be the schedule. But then you got to look at the games like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and be like, all right, who wins those games? I think that's where it gets really, really interesting. This year, you're at Minnesota and you're at Purdue and you're at Ohio State. And those are the games that could be like, well, Purdue and Minnesota, especially at Purdue, at Minnesota, depending on how good we think they're going to be. I think Purdue's going to be very respectable, and Purdue caught them last year. So I think there's a lot of arguments for why Iowa could underperform this year. And so I have them at 7 wins and 4-5 in the Big Ten with losses to Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. It's going to be interesting for sure. So the final 2 teams we obviously have to talk about is Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I want to talk about them kind of collectively because we disagree on which one is going to finish at the top of the Big Ten West.
Yeah, I have Minnesota finishing the top of the Big Ten West this year. They've been close a couple times. Obviously, we think back to Tanner Morgan's really good year, again, with Rashad Bateman, as I mentioned earlier. They looked so good at the beginning of last season. You think they had Ohio State on the ropes before Mohamed Ibrahim went down with his Achilles injury. I think that it's comebackable. That injury isn't as serious as it has been. Now, obviously, it was a death sentence for running backs. I think that he'll be able to recover, and I think Tanner Morgan's the better QB. Obviously, Wisconsin, with their linebacking core, is the better defense. But with Minnesota, just with their offense, of how potent it can be, and PJ Fleck's just a really good coach, and they're rowing the boat over there, Hate to say it.
Yeah, man, calm down. I don't know. I mean, it's the confidence in Wisconsin's defense being great, which is why I lean that route. And not to mention, you still have the talented, obviously you have the potentially best running back in the Big Ten in Braylon Allen coming in as 100%. A true freshman last year and just dominating. So suddenly imagine him in a year or two now. And then there's still opportunity for Graham Mertz to improve, I think, as well. So when you have like a guy like Nick Herbig there and Keanu Benton, who are just absolutely disgustingly good. I know they're going to have a good run game. I know they're going to have an elite defense, where with Minnesota, there's just way more questions on the defensive side of the ball, and offensive line is still a massive question for Minnesota. And right now we're just having the faith of, well, it'll be good because they're Minnesota. But like that wasn't the case for Iowa last year. And they had literally the best center in college football. So Wisconsin's a more surefire bet that they're going to be consistent. The game's being played in Wisconsin. So, I mean, that's inherently an advantage in itself. And it's also interesting because they have a similar, cross division opponent in MSU this year, who in themselves is an incredibly interesting discussion.
Yeah, the tough thing for Wisconsin though is, again, they play Ohio State, so that's just kind of
one loss on there for sure.
Yeah, we write that off as a pretty much an automatic loss. So it is a little bit tougher schedule. I do think Michigan State's really interesting. Obviously, you take away Kenneth Walker. I have them both losing, but I could really see it both ways. I think Michigan State could easily have a down year this season.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because
that's a decisive game for both.
They both play at MSU too. So it's going to be a fun way to judge how both those teams could perform heading into their meeting in the final week of the year as well. So that's what gets really interesting, I think.
I think Penn State's a really interesting team too. They're kind of all over the place on predictions. They're not ranked in the top 25 this season. I've seen a lot of low end predictions for them this year too. So I definitely think it's a much easier game.
Right. I mean, I'm with you. So, I mean, like, it is interesting. I mean, with Penn State specifically, I think for Minnesota, I mean, so we both have them losing that game at Penn State. Like, I think there's a world where they could easily win that game. Like, I don't think it's a guaranteed lock that Penn State is going to be great this season. It's a huge year for James Franklin. Like, Penn State's 11-11 in the last 2 years. You're coming back with Sean Clifford again, this time now without Jahan Dotson. John Clifford has no upside. The guy is so boring as a 6th-year senior. Like, yeah, they're going to have a lot of talent at wide receiver still, but like, I just don't know exactly where the upside lies for Penn State. Their defense is going to have to step up in a huge way if they want to be a contender in the Big Ten. I just don't see it happening this year. So
I think one of those teams will definitely go and play Ohio State for the Big Ten championship.
Yeah,
we do both have them as our top 2 teams for the season. Just the Big Ten, we beat up on each other a little bit more than other conferences do.
Right.
Besides Wisconsin and Minnesota as, the slight favorites, I feel there's a ton of parity between a lot of these teams.
So, I mean, like, you have Wisconsin going 9-3 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. And then Minnesota going 10-2 with 7-2 in the Big Ten. Because I'm lower on MSU for a variety of reasons, specifically including like, yeah, they're returning Peyton Thorne, who I would say lacks upside, but you're having to replace Kenneth Walker with a risky player in Jalen Berger transferring from Wisconsin. I think there's just a lot of moving pieces there that I'm a little bit worried about. I think Minnesota and Wisconsin have a little bit more going for them. Long story short, I think both of them are going to beat MSU. That provides kind of some high upside in their scheduling. So I have them at 10 wins for Minnesota and 11 wins for Wisconsin. But I do think that both of them are going to be upset once because, let's be honest, they both those teams aren't like the most locked and loaded teams to dominate in the Big Ten. So I do think both of them are going to get snagged by one of these teams at some point. It's just kind of a question of when, which is I wasn't really able to find that exact place where it would happen. But I do think because, like you said, the parity in the Big Ten, I think is going to happen. So realistically, my actual expectation would be Minnesota at 9 wins and Wisconsin at 10, with Wisconsin still coming out on top of the Big Ten West to face, of course, Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. So we're interested in your guys' comments down below. Drop all of your comments and your thoughts. Obviously, all of you fans of other Big Ten teams want to hear what you guys have to say, where we're wrong, where we're right about your team, and what you think about Nebraska and the situation as well heading into this season. So we appreciate you guys for watching. But as always, I'm Josh. That's Caleb. This has been Backseat Sports. And guys, we will see you next time. Go Big Red.